Hey everybody, it's Dr. Julie Quinn here. I thought I would create this video to talk to you a little bit about some of those important literary terms that you'll be working on if you haven't taken your midterm yet, and also for the project in Module 3. And the lens that I want to do that is to look at the writing of Charlotte Perkins Gilman. In the course, you've got, if you go to the modules and you go to Module 3, you'll see that you've had a collection of readings, and the last set of readings this week is Mad Woman in the Attic, Part 1, Section 1, and of course the accompanying reading, The Yellow Wallpaper, which is a shorter short. It may be not as short as the Cask of Amontillado, but it's not particularly long, right? So you've got that sort of late 19th century text, and we've got the accompanying critical analysis of the text itself. And so I wanted to talk about The Yellow Wallpaper, and I want to talk about important literary terms that are going to apply to your work in the projects for these last three modules, 3, 4, and 5. We're going to talk about plot, we're going to talk about conflict, setting, and theme. And I think that as I do this with The Yellow Wallpaper, I want you to consider these terms and these ideas as you put together your project and as you prepare for the midterm. Okay, so Yellow Wallpaper is a really interesting text. You have the Project Gutenberg E version. I actually have it myself in a different version, so I have mine sort of laid out. This is, a late 19th century text. The plot of the text has to do with a woman who is unwell, and her husband takes them from town and moves them out into the country for the summer so she can quote unquote heal, right? The narrative arc, that's the building of tension throughout the story, is about how this unnamed woman, and find that interesting, she is the narrator. She's the protagonist in the story. She's the main driver character. How she is unnamed, and her husband, John, is a physician, which is an interesting choice for his career, right? He's named. His sister is named. Friends are named, but she goes unnamed. And you may determine that as far as the story is concerned, there's a reason that Perkins Gilman did not name the protagonist here. But the arc of the story is living in this large rural mansion that's been abandoned, and it's been not well kept up, and the narrator of the story being mostly trapped inside a room with disgusting, peeling, oily yellow wallpaper, and what happens to her over the course of time being trapped in that quote-unquote jail. That's the conflict. The conflict is she doesn't want to be isolated from her friends. The narrator wants to be in the world. There's a mention at some point in The Yellow Wallpaper. It's hard for me to find it in this version because it's not laid out page by page, but there's a portion talking about the baby being born, and there's no interactions with her and the baby presented, but that it's a signal, and Perkins Gilman may not have had the language of the time, but think in modern understanding that that's a bit of a signal for possibly she may be suffering from postpartum depression, right? She may be suffering anxiety and have other health issues that are related to pregnancy and birth and motherhood. So we've got a conflict, and one of the major conflicts that I see, and you may disagree with me, and that's perfectly fine, is that John's not listening to the protagonist. John laughs at me, of course, she says, but one expects that in marriage. And I have that highlighted on the screen, and I wonder, do we really expect the spouse laughs at me, not laughs with me, right? So she's suffering. And at the beginning, we have this woman who is just trying to sort of deal with this new environment. John is not around a lot, and when he is, he doesn't listen to her. So there is this conflict. It's a marital conflict between husband and wife, and how do they negotiate the space. And it's not really actually about negotiation, because John does no negotiation. John's in control, and the narrator has no power. So we could argue that, you know, the theme of this story, there's plenty of interpretations, especially at the end and what happens there. But the theme is this about a woman's experiences through postpartum depression. Is this about women's roles in the 19th century Western world? Is this about, and I've seen this one too, and I found that this one is really interesting, is this story really about how men, this is a feminist interpretation of the story, of what the theme is, about men's control over women's bodies. You would think that this text is really archaic, but I think what Perkins Gilman is actually representing, and she didn't mean to, but this text still has amazing presence in 2022, because you have to think about how are women's bodies controlled by men, and think about that in the United States right now. Think about what's happening with the Supreme Court. Think about the medical establishment and how they often do not listen to women, especially women of color, and how the medical establishment often has these weird, interesting, paternalistic, patriarchal processes for women to be able to make choices about their body. For example, having to get a checkup and wait an X amount of days for an abortion, or at least until fairly recently, women having to get husband's permission to get birth control. That happened during my mom's era in the 20th century. And so you can see how, even though technology has changed significantly over time, the themes of patriarchy, of male medical control over the sort of medical industrial complex, can be exhibited in the Yellow Wallpaper. And what's really great about this text is the buildup of tension over time, and this idea of focus on obsession. And after a while, our protagonist doesn't just see the Yellow Wallpaper, but sees inside the wallpaper, and sees a woman inside the wallpaper trying to get out. What's ambiguous about those passages in the story is this fact that women, it could be, it's like there's multiple readings of this. Think about the Bartleby the Scrivener, the video that I did for last week, and how it's ambiguous, and how reading this is a challenge to come up with, well, what's exactly happening? We don't know. Literally, is a woman trying to break out of the wallpaper? No, I don't think that's what's happening. But it's a descent into deeper mental struggles. What they're tied with, we can't say exactly. We can make assumptions, especially about it being possibly postpartum. But one of the issues here is the sort of rest therapy that is not done now, but in the 19th century was a form of treatment of women, that they're being hysterical, that will just let them sleep it off, that no stimulation is how they heal. And that's like going into solitary confinement in a prison. And so look at the descriptions of the room as we get toward the end of this. I got to find the description. The bed is nailed down. There's like bars on the walls. The bed will not move. There's claw marks and teeth marks on the wood of the bed. Right? So now she's gone. The servants are gone. The things are gone. And there's nothing left but the great bedstead nailed down with the canvas mattress we found on it. Right? So now you get a sense of, it's not just, it was kind of a nursery, but has this been built to protect her from self-harm? There's a lot of questions that we can think about. She talks about a well-hidden rope and suggestions, trigger warning, possible planning of suicide, and how she's locked the husband out. And there's a lot of tension at the end of this. And there's this scene about how she has really made sort of a change. She's gone from docile to wild, almost like a quote unquote animal. And Perkins Gilman is describing her sort of taking back her power. And when her husband sees this at the end of the narrative. He faints and she crawls over his body. She takes a position above him, and some could say that it's her sort of taking power back. You can interpret this in plenty of different ways, and I'll leave this there. I've talked about this for a couple minutes. You know, we've got plot, conflict, setting, and theme talked about in this quick video. And I also want to pull apart a little bit of your accompanying reading, The Mad Woman in the Attic. Now, this part of the reading, this is part 1, section 2, that I did not ask you to read. And reading deeply this idea of the paternalistic penis, which is what it was in the first reading, skim that. It's this idea that these texts can be interpreted in many ways, and that women weren't meant to be writers. And we've seen that sort of theme about women weren't meant to do X. Women weren't meant to be in the military. Women weren't meant to be doctors. Women were meant to be airline pilots, and so on and so forth, and how society is really changing. But in section 2, or in the second section of this book that you've got here, I wanted to read this to you because this is a poem written by Gilman. In the opening stanzas of Charlotte Perkins Gilman's punningly titled In Duty Bound show how inevitable it was for a female artist to translate in spatial terms her despair at the spiritual constrictions of what Gilman called home comfort. In duty bound, a life hemmed in, whichever way the spirit turns to look. No chance of breaking out, except by sin. No even room to shirk, simply to live and work. An obligation pre-imposed, unsought, yet binding with the force of natural law. The pressure of antagonistic thought, aching within each hour. A sense of wasting power. A house with roof so darkly low, the heavy rafters shut the sunlight out. One cannot stand erect without a blow, until the soul inside cries for a grave more wide. So in this, you can sort of see a representation of the narrator's spirit and the themes that Gilman reproduces over time about how women trapped in homes, women with a lack of freedom of movement, feel jailed. And this is a really interesting line, no chance of breaking out except by sin. That it's a sin to go against the rules that in this society that your husband has set for you, to go against the rules of society and to do what you want. And one final note, that this is not a reading that you're going to have in this class. I mean, I certainly talk about Fanny Fern, the writer, the American writer from the 19th century, in my early American literature class. But the theme of women doing it for themselves was wonderfully presented to Gilman by writers like Fanny Fern. You know, she moved out of her home. She used to walk around town in men's clothes so she could have freedom of movement. If you think about the constriction of women in corsets and petticoats, and it's heavy and it's awkward and it's hard to walk. You can sort of see that through the pen. I mean, this is the age before radio, before television, that women were extremely limited, and not all of them were literate. I mean, the ones that we get to read are. But there's this idea that women need to break out of the constrictions and the confines, and thematically, that's what stands out to me in the Yellow Wallpaper. And if you skim the accompanying readings to see what literature experts are talking about and the themes that they find, you may find some overlap. You may not. If you have questions on any of this, I'd love for you to reach out and talk to me about this. I hope that my discussion of some of the points in the Yellow Wallpaper help you feel really comfortable and confident moving into your project for Module 3. If you have any questions, always reach out and talk to me.